On November 20th, 1995, Sonia Rubio, age 25, appears dead near Oropesa, Castellón. In the course of a year, other 4 young women follow the same fate. The social alarm curves throughout the province before the possibility that behind the crimes there's a serial killer. Music. Since the past July 2nd, nothing has been heard from Sonia Rubio, a young woman aged 25 from Benicassim, who disappeared when she was heading to her apartment. Her relatives, her friends, and her neighbors try by any means to locate. Begins everything with the disappearance of a girl who had come from London. That day arrives at her parents' apartment, leaves the suitcase on the bed without unpacking, and goes with her friends to dinner. And they do not appear. She does not return. Then her parents present the light. The first great impact was the disappearance of Sonia Rubio, a girl known in the youth environment of Castellón. From a known family, a normal number does not. Disappear made no sense, and I think that all we knew that she disappeared. It was still not voluntary when a person adult in normally the first stages. It is thought that she has left voluntarily, because in the case of Sonia Rubio, from the first moment, the police suspects that it is a disturbing disappearance. She was only a normal and ordinary girl, an English teacher aged 25 or 26, who was going to spend the summer with her family. Because she was going to leave, there was no reason, none. But above all, the condition that her parents have that Sonia Rubio would not have left without having notified them. Have some drinks for it for several days, and then they go to a discotheque that no longer exists, the basements of the Balance. And for the moment, Sonia is tired. She has only come from life doing that. She wanted an ideal house. We are going to leave behind gardens in national sections perversion, and to the interest press near home. And since there was no one, there was the people. Those could not take us home. You look at the basements of the hotel. There's a door. There's a discotheque that was called Picasso. From there, Sonia comes out. She comes out through here. She goes to the traffic light. With a friend, the friend asks direction to Castellón, and she turns direction Barcelona. Her apartment's I am from where she leaves around 4 in the morning, and impotence of Castellón in direction to enter, without in the doll. And the truth is that the strange thing is that there were people, although it is an afternoon hour. But come on, anyone who knows Benicassim, who lived the ring, go out to leave at the hours of the night around there. Apart from the testimonies of the friends, what remains very clear is that Sonia's relationship with her relatives is very close and very good. No one in her environment understands what could have happened. Sonia did what was normally her routine, walk through a wide place with visibility where many people pass. Perhaps she had gotten into the car. Some stranger had accepted an invitation from someone who was not known. The days pass, leaving appears. Then people mobilize, concentrations begin. And we have to return to Seoul. We want to find solidarity. It was when citizen participation began to move. It has been a bit living with much intensity, this case in particular, because apart from being student of journalism, apart from being adolescent woman, my father, who was directing at that moment the investigation as head of the judicial police in Castellón, was working well with much caution. But while I did see my father 24 hours devoted to case, he barely appeared at home. I think that for the first time, if it is a deployment of posters and informative at European level and even American, tremendous, we use Interpol. If it will be thousands and thousands of posters in color, and all the people in the group of friends who traveled a lot through all the airports were leaving the poster of the disappearance of Sonia. Applause. Practically the entire province of Castellón turns out when it comes to searching for this person, and to the own actions of the police, which is to distribute images in very specific places, joins the action of a relative of this person who works for a transport company and who offers a place more than 15,000 photographs of Sonia in different points, not only of Castellón, but of all Spain. There were several cases that called them different points of Spain that had seen very similar girls, and it was checked by the members of the judicial police, the civil guard of those areas. And physically they were similar, but it was none of them. After 142 days of fruitless search on November 20th, 1995, the investigators of the civil guard receive a call. A hunter warns us in a place there in Front 9 in Baldo. Oropesa finds a mummified body. Then we feared the worst. We went to do the ocular inspection in the area. It was done as stipulated, and already by the clothes and others, although this bird recognizable, well, we knew that was only what we saw was, well, the body of female victim with apparent signs of violence. It was outdoors in a mountainous area close to a secondary road for vehicle passage, but relatively close. It was a somewhat rugged area around here. More or less there was like a dung heap, we obliged, not a area where they threw remains of garbage dead. Animals and others vary. Small, but it was an uncontrolled dump, and a little higher up is where leather appears, and that was what misled our dogs when we tracked, because we tracked this area looking for her. But the dump of having dead animals is smells, and others misled, and that is why we did not find the body. The first thing was the identification and the process, and we then initiated the investigation that cost us considered a couple of days and brought us a lot of information. Sonia Rubio covered with a knot and some branches and things put on top to hide the corpse. Does it have any significance that he covers the head? Is that he knew her? Is that he has remorse? It is part of some type of sexual paraphilia. As in other cases, signs of having been subjected to torture and outraged are appreciated. There were ties on him around the neck and on a garment rolled around the neck that was what caused the death, as well as other elements aimed at immobility. The fundamental, cause that is determining, was what we call mechanical. Asphyxia by pressure of the loop on the neck, that is what is commonly spoken of strangulation with loop. In the case Sonia, in species popular, there is a detail that was fundamental solid stop the mouth insulating tape 70, and in front, it is collected they're going to analyze in the criminalistics laboratory, and they tell us that that half tape is not marketed in Spain. It is a tape that does not have a usual width, which is 19 millimeters in. This case, it is a tape that is 18 millimeters. Then we throw ourselves at a year ago working with all the manufacturers of tape from all over the world, a person specifically dedicated to that. And that measure was not manufactured, then there we were lost. Whereas he got this tape of gold as measure here. There were 3 scenes. Obviously the scene where Sonia appears is not the place where her life has ended. That secondary scene is the place where he will have abandoned the corpse. There had to be a primary scene where the subject had enough intimacy to be able to attack her, kill her, and place her in this way, and a tertiary scene of transit that made us think also to the investigators that he had to have a vehicle, because to leave the victim there, he had to have been able to transport her. They began to see that until that moment, parent of the girls, the young women waiting at the doors of the discotheque, had not been seen, so that they would not return only home, because that had not disappeared in that circumstance doing hitchhiking, then it was something absolutely habitual while the civil guard searches for the author of the crime. Of Sonia, the corpses of other 3 young women, Natalia Archie Los Francisca Salas and Mercedes Velez, appear in a few days. 3 corpses appear above in a dry river among the brambles. The workers of the Villarreal City Council will find first a body in very bad condition, 2 or 3 days later, I think another, and 2 days later another. There are 2 girls that have element in common. The 3 are drug addicts who practice prostitution to obtain money and be able to swell. They were girls who exercised street prostitution and arrived, disappeared a few months, but no one had reported their disappearance. True, in humans they were people who were linked to the family, then no one missed them. The 3 victims die by their vocation. They appear tied with their underwear. We are facing a behavioral pattern of a serial killer, or are cases that cannot be connected at that moment. We relate one thing to the other. The national police leads the investigation of these 3 girls, and we lead the aggression, and really we find ourselves with the difficulty that we are facing 2 different police bodies in 2 different demarcations. Therefore it is more difficult to unite the data, to conclude that possibly because not the 4 murders could have been committed by the same person, I at no time with the appearance of the corpse of Sonia Rubio thought that it could be a serious killer. I think neither I nor practically anyone the profiles of women found or corpses found were very different. So it did not seem that there was a common link. Nothing had to do the first victim with the second in terms of phenotype appearance characteristics. Applause. A year and a half after the death of Sonia Rubio, the National Police arrests a man named Claudio Alba as alleged author of the deaths of the 3 prostitutes, because the investigators fixed their gaze on this person, and was led them to think that he may have been the author of the crimes, is a frequent user of the Constitution of the area, and they link him by a matter of bank Ellis when the Chaika carried a bag over the head of a specific supermarket. The search that is made in the home of Claudio Alva bags of the same supermarket are found the evidence that the police presumes are simply that Claudia knew one of the girls that her vehicle was similar to one of the vehicles that usually prowl the area, and that they had found a plastic bag from a shopping center. But well as a bag from a shopping center, of which there are millions when Claudio Alva was arrested, the press, well, turned to society also there, are tremendous images of the people contributing the brain in the afternoon night that they arrest Claudio Alba, and he is taken to judicial presence. I find myself with a submissive, calm person, and also surprised because he did not understand what he was doing there. He told me that during the last year, the National Police had called him on several occasions to take the statement to collaborate, and he had always attended voluntarily to provide collaboration, but the profile of Claudio Alba was all in a marginal block of society. He was a trucker or some prostitutes. This has nothing to do with normal people who walk down the street. I think that was also intended a bit with that to corner him and try to reduce a bit the fear that there was in Castellón. Claudio was subjected for 2 years to all kinds of examinations and psychiatric tests, and from an electroencephalogram to all kinds of evaluations to investigate his most intimate sexual life. At all times, he maintained his innocence at no time did he confess, nor did the police manage to make him confess, and that was a somewhat strange circumstance to Claudio. They showed 3 photographs of the 3 girls, and they told him, "You have murdered these practices." He said no. The response of the police authority that was with him was, "We do not care what you say it has been you, and you're going to eat it." He told him, "I do not care that you say that it is true, as it is a lie. You are simply, he was abused because there was no other person present in society as guilty, or as alleged guilty. It was the person that was easiest for them to present in society, and they decided that perhaps he could fulfill the profile, or perhaps he could not discuss and assume that imputation without defending himself too much." In February 1997, barely a month after the arrest of Claudio Alba, the corpse of a 5th young woman appears in similar circumstances to the 4 previous. Sandra Garcia. The disappearance of Amelia and Sandra Garcia had been reported by her relatives 5 months before her corpse appears in a reservoir near the town of Honda for being rural area. The competence of the investigation is of the civil guard. Amelia appears in a lake in a clay mine that had become lakes, natural, and appears floating. But in this case, there is a peculiarity, and it is that she has been beaten in a quite cruel way. For the case appears a novelty over the previous, and it is that apart from the aspect of the mechanical asphyxia that we have already described, there is a non-mortal pericranial trauma, but there is a pericranial trauma, a much larger body, a physically stronger person, but with the same characteristics or similar characteristics that we saw in the first. The great difference was that it was a recent corpse very close to her disappearance. We're talking about a young person who appears naked, and the hands literally have been tied by her own bra. The violence that has been exercised with her is tremendous. Therefore, here the possibility of asking questions arises. We are facing a victim who was murdered by Claudio Alba and who appears at that moment, or really they have mistaken the author. We not 100% but 99% know that R2 had not been that person 5 months after admitting him to prison. We go to the month of June of the year 1997. A hearing is held in the provincial court, and that same day the provincial court itself agrees that Claudio Alba be released immediately, and that same day it is agreed, and he is released. I am happy because I know that this is being clarified, and that, well, you know that I am innocent in that, and that, well, finally I can clarify something to my conscience. I have it healthy and sure that I am innocent of what, after 5 months in prison and 2.5 years under judicial disposition, it would be worth asking perhaps if Claudio Albano was one more victim of this case, because of course in what situation of our person Claudio lost his job, because he was practically 2 years at the disposition of the judicial authority to drive missing, and also he had to go to sign once a week, because he was on provisional release. Claudio lost his house because he lived on rent, and for a year he had the economic help of relatives and friends. But finally the resources of all ended. Claudio lost his vehicle because his car was seized by the police to investigate, and when he recovered it, it was absolutely destroyed. His name and his image had been seen strongly damaged. He had been presented as a serial killer. Castellón, with the author of execrable and terrible crimes against the victims. We all wanted to find a killer. There was a lot of social pressure, and the police work is put, and neither is a question. Claudio Alba suffered an unprecedented social, moral, judicial, fiscal, police beating. Once he received the compensation, a few months passed until he died. What is really disturbing is that if Claudio Alba was not the killer who was killing women in Castellón, was a free man, and off the investigators' radar, the investigation seems to be at a dead point. The Castellón prosecutor's office then requests the support of the elite body of the Civil Guard, the Central Operational Unit. The domicile section of the Central Operational Unit intervenes not in all homicide cases that can be seen in Spain, but in very particular cases. We always talk about acts of extreme gravity, or, well, that has caused great social alarm, or, Well, that involves minors' multiple victims in quite complex cases, and that is not resolved logically for the first time in the history of criminal investigation in Spain. Criminal profiling is resorted to, that is, to the making of a psychological portrait of the subject they were looking for through the data that could be extracted from the study of the scenes of their crimes and of their victims. What we call a criminal profile. Two types of profiling are done. On the one hand, the criminal profiling to see who could be the author, what type of modus operandi he had, if he had some type of signature, and on the other hand, the geographic, which were the areas of action of the alleged author or authors of the acts. The two types of profile. The two are police unprecedented until the time in Spain. It had not been done. There was no in any group in the UAR civil, nor in publicity in Spain, that was dedicated to criminal profiling at that moment. There are several suspects, let's say, but they want that with a more technical criterion. Someone exposes them clearly the arrow of where they have to direct all their investigations. These two profiles were complemented with other two reports. Expert, that was the issuance of a report to the FBI, and on the other hand, we also resort to a bit of the University of Valencia, through Vicente Garrido Geno, psychologist of the University of Valencia, so that he would also lend us a hand, never better said, in some more hand to this investigation, that in principle was quite complex. There were like two types of victims, some victims who were dedicated to prostitution, and then two girls who did not form part of that area. But the first question is, these victims have something in common. These victims that apparently conform two groups, the prostitutes, and those who are not have something in common. Arrived at that point, the civil guard found it difficult to continue investigating something that had an efficacy, let's say immediate. There was no pattern, there was a way. There was some left a trace to the aggressor that was similar from one to another, but that was a very labeled connection. Or at the moment, you have to consider the existence of other traces that are the traces of behavior, the dream of behaviors, or the decisions or acts that the subject performs, and that the subject decides to do them with a purpose. The investigators begin to work on the possible link between the five victims. Then an important hypothesis is you consider all women prostitutes from their go-to conclusion that the victims linked to the crimes, because the subject considered all women as prostitutes, cosified them as people without value, and that really deserved to die because all are prostitutes. But the second question, important, that link to crimes, was the scenes properly set, not so much because it was in the same place, but because it was in the same type of place that is uninhabited areas. Truth of those of what we could call the surroundings of Castella still does not leave her in an open field covered, and in A with some brambles, to others thrown in a dry river, and another lesson of a pond. And then how the victims were the victims presented a series of common characteristics. They were all subjected to a protocol or to a ritual control. There are already coinciding elements in terms of the way of acting of the alleged aggressor. Intimate clothes of the victims were used to gag them, to tie them, to strangle them. There were indications of very similar violence. They all die by mechanical strangulation, and all appear naked and subsequently covered also with personal object of theirs, are object of robbery none of. The victims appear with the personal effects. They carried rings, chains. Vicente Garrido makes a psychological profile of the prototype of serial killer. In fact, it fits with what is statistically usual in this type of multi-quotes white man between 30 and 35 years, lives alone with some relative accolade, and is a subject who has difficulty relating to others, and especially with women. It is very rare that you initiate yourself in a series of crimes in a way so, between quotes, perfect. If he now is a profile, you have to ask yourself, someone who commits a first crime, death of, way so elaborate as a novice in this. I raise in my profile the idea that not that he had antecedent for crimes of violence, not perhaps necessarily a murder, but that person knew what was to submit, probably a woman. Then it was likely that he had antecedents for violent crimes, including sexual aggressions. What we do is a list of people who have been convicted will have antecedents for sexual aggressions or for violent crimes against women. The focus is centered, the investigative focus, on a person, on a young man who already had antecedents for crimes against sexual integrity years before he had served sentence for a rape to a young woman in Castellón, and the focus is centered on this individual, Joaquín Ferrándiz Ventura. In 1990, Joaquín Ferrándiz Ventura had been sentenced to 14 years in prison for having raped a young woman in the province of Castellón. The first case that we have record of how he acts, if not, is because to Maria Jose that go, circulating in Castellón with her moped de borda, hits her with his car. He offers the virus to take her to the hospital because he has cause her some injuries, and in reality what he does is that they get in his car, and instead of going to hospital, he takes her and makes an orange grove where the plane inside the typologies of rapists, if not Joaquín Ferrándiz, would fit in the field of those who seek power the powerful, are subjects that deep down have low self-esteem, and through the control and domination of the victim obtain nourished their self-esteem that they have so impaired he never recognizes neither before his family, among the officials, nor in the trial that is held regarding that he may have been the author of a sexual aggression towards Asia one young during the years that he is admitted to prison. He only relates to officials. He dedicates himself to reading to playing chess. He does not relate to what he well, under his point of view, are inferior people, are criminals. He does not consider himself a criminal. Ours, it must be said, that of a sentence of 14 years. He only serves 5, and it is curious how 3 months after he leaves the street, for good behavior in 5, with the penitentiary benefits that a person like him could have, the crimes begin to occur in his geographic context. Is it coincidence, or is it that Shima has learned the lesson and has returned to act, but this time he is not going to leave any witness alive? Applause. The civil guard then focuses on finding out who Estimo really is, and they begin to investigate his life and environment since his release from prison Eximo. There are 2 versions. On the one hand, we have the typical exemplary young man, orderly, educated, compliant worker is a model person. Logically, if an exemplary worker, they work for an insurance company in an area where they review the vehicles, and in fact his job when he left they had to do 2 people, but also as he was very methodical, good worker, kind man. And we could say the perfect son, lived with his mother, was a well-dressed, attractive man, was the person who fell well. In short, we are facing a simple, kind character. We can say almost that he is the perfect son-in-law. Then he has a second profile that would be that of the person, well, who disinhibits, where he is seen well when he moves in environments where they do not know him, when he tries to abuse and prevail superior mind with superiority over certain women who do not know him, when he relates to third parties who do not know him, and changes, is an aggressive personality, is a violent personality, is a personality that is not going to let himself be dominated by others. The relationship he has with his mother also is very particular, very ambivalent. It seems that there is a good relationship between them, but to leave in freedom, the first rate begins to have a relationship. Very aggressive with her, he mistreats her physically and verbally extreme, that he also does with his sister to his mother as a result of entering prison. They are all reproaches, as the conduct of his mother is totally submissive towards him, of his mother, of his sister, his family environment, which he has also been varying and evolving to bad to worse than extreme violence, I would say, in the home, despite the fact that it is hidden at family level. Leading state of life is not easy, not. Double personality, double life is not nothing easy. Because you have to be able to dissociate, to separate the acts of extreme violence from what is a life where you apparently are a good person, that you can only do if your moral emotions, empathy, compassion, responsibility, loyalty, sense of justice, companionship, etc., are neutralized. A psychopath is characterized precisely because he is alienated from what we could call the moral community. He understands the ethical norm, but it does not affect him, and from there we see that in the periods in which he has had a stable sentimental relationship with young women, of his environment there has been no victim. None disappeared, no homicide has been committed in Castellón. It is the environment in which he moves at the moment that has had some sentimental rupture, that he has not had a stable partner. Well, it is seen that he begins to frequent prostitution again. And yes, there are victims, as in the case of the 4 or 5 victims. In February 1998, Joaquín Ferrándiz starred in an episode that makes all the alarms go off moment, that he commits an error. We already knew that we had him. The error. What was that? From a discotheque in Castellón. He followed a girl. He approached her alone around 6. Always in the morning, the boarder tries to introduce her in his vehicle. Because we squeezed them until they lost consciousness, the girl was about to remain conscious. There's a neighbor who hears voices, hears screams, go help of this young woman. Then it is when they find Ferrándiz with this girl. He has her in the car already practically unconscious. The one that seemed to happen says, then it is known, and telling him some skis, my girlfriend has cheated on me. We are discussing, do not call the police. The police intervenes. Logically, the young woman is very clear that she has no contact nor any relationship with Shima. And from there, yes, the objective is put on this person, the aggressor, as he is aware that his antecedents and that they can get to him, decides to be proactive and presents himself at the police station to ask if he's been reported by his ex-girlfriend because he has had with her a certain fight. He tells what has happened in the discussion. With his girlfriend, the report can say that the police certainty is having that he could be the author of the acts. Joaquín Ferrándiz Ventura surveillance follow-up devices are set up on the same, mainly centered the weekends, and very especially when he was left alone, because he went out with friends. But there comes a moment that he disengaged from the friends. Then those moments for us were elements of tension, because we thought that he could attack some other young woman, and logically not. We could allow that there be not much less a sexual aggression, and much less still that there be that a homicide could be committed by police imprudence. From there is when we stick to his side 24 hours a day. We did not leave him, he did not know, but then we were by his side because we were afraid that he would repeat, or we were convinced that he was going to repeat music. On July 12, 1998, the agents are witnesses of a new attempt of assault to a young woman. By Shima, this will be a definitive. Episode 2. Incriminate him. He went out with his girlfriend, left her at home a prudent hour, and he went, as I decide, always from home. A device is set up on him, and it is the police device was not just any device. Female civil guards have been put in the environment of Shima to see if in some way we could see something more of the personality, all the modus operandi that Shima had with respect to women when he was alone, and in this case, well, a young woman appears whom he well follows. Lav and a discotheque leave the discotheque behind her, and is each one in his vehicle. That this is the route we did that night from the discotheque to where the girl stops to buy tobacco and parks the car that goes follow up, and none of them. He approaches him. He takes advantage. Any person who is going to circulate with his vehicle uses it and puts in the middle, and it is what is called Moe's in the police slang. Put a sandwich car. You do not lose sight of the objective, but always behind him. There is a different car, and never is none of the others. Follows to another leisure place of the area of Benicassim, and well, he stays observing in a very direct way. We see that he is there behind his car. He approaches another car and sticks his head out. I was on that side from when I saw him, that he raised his head at the girl, and we would already have a vision on his person. A young woman, after entering the second place, returns to access her vehicle, begins to circulate logically to go to her home where the young woman was going to arrive. It was day. He leaves buzzing, leaves very fast, and then he leaves behind, and then another of the follow-up cars to the internal channel tells us he has taken the air out of the wheels. That is why he bent down, or is nothing thrown deciphering the new, and looked in case. Then the girl who was novice arrives at an area that were in works, and there was great villa and quite speed that return. And at that moment the car team behind, that was Joaquín Ferrándiz, goes to assist the person who had had the accident. Was his modus operandi provoke an accident and suddenly go out to help the victim, puts her in his car, would take her to abuse her whole. In this occasion, the car that goes behind Joaquín Ferrándiz is the civil guard that are watching him. There's an agent of the follow-up team that manages to get into the vehicle of Shima, and they go in the vehicle of Shima. The victim continues driving, and a civil guard agent to the Castellón hospital, where she is assisted, and then also they get out to assist our victim and prevent the victim from getting alone in the car of Joaquín Ferrándiz. And they also go logically. Joaquín Ferrándiz cannot consummate his rape and leaves, but of course, the civil guard has seen with their own eyes how he tried to hunt another victim. I think that the great error of the Sismo was precisely to abandon his control, try to feel again something that he missed, and it is precisely that omnipotent power to decide, control, see the fear of the victim, her eyes, and finally kill her. And he cannot resist much more time than he does on the part of the judicial authority. And on the part of the prosecutor's office, it is determined that this person cannot be on the street because he is a danger at that moment. It is received that he has to arrest him quickly, because in any oversight Joaquín Ferrándiz could kill another girl. The civil guard arrests Joaquín Ferrándiz Ventura as alleged author of the deaths of the 5 young women. At the end of July 1998, Shima enters prison. I think he was waiting for it. He knows that he has committed, or knew at that moment he had committed, errors, and simply neither justifies it nor does not justify as a person. Cole first evaluates you and then talks to you. Then, he evaluated the situation, remained silent, and simply say that that with him. It was not going to this movie when it was known that the killer was Joaquín Ferrándiz, or it was tremendous because he did not fulfill the profile of what people imagined that a killer was. He led a normal life of an exemplary worker, was an exemplary neighbor, had his girlfriend. Who was going to imagine that Joaquín Ferrándiz was a serial killer Castellón when I had him closer and talked to him? And that was when the jail Amos to register his home. There it was. When I had to do land as closed, guaranteed, airtight, distant, closed. Tense, or we are doing a search his home, and that bothered him a lot, because the home of his mother, in fact, I know that I returned some letters and that. And he reproached me, says that is private, We began to go through the rooms, and in one of them we counted the newspapers in which he surely read it and boasted of these murders. And then we found in another room the tape in which it was not standard, although both threw at woman. It was a sealing tape of a very special measure of 18 millimeters, specifically, and it is used by Joaquín Ferrándiz Ventura both to gag at first of the first of his victims, that Maria Jose, the girl who rapes at first in Castellano, as to Sonia Rubio after his release in the year 95 from prison, and that ended in the homicide. I remember that it was in an ironing area that from his house that his mother had, and there it was on a shelf. Civil Guard sergeant takes the caliper, measures it, and turns to our companions and says, "Bingo." We take it the first thing he did was measure the and bingo, but we loved in the search. An ashtray was found, the wheel cap that he had deflated in his last attempt of aggression for us. It was very important to be able to credit with an indication, with an objective proof, that it was no longer only that portrait we had created about the author, but that there was physical proof to be able to say you are the author of the homicide sounds Rubio, and therefore we are not wrong. It is you during the search in the home. The mother of Shimo at all times shows well an attitude, I understand that. Logical, that is a defense of her son. She cannot believe that her son has carried out those terrible acts. However, the police is aware that she herself at some point has come to doubt that her son is not the guilty of the murders in a telephone intervention that was done to her talking with another woman, said the pity story. Oh, when he arrived in the early morning with the clothes stained with blood, and he told her that it was a loss, that he had had some boys, but effectively not, it was a fight, it was after the murder. Music. Despite the incriminating evidence against him, Joaquín Ferrándiz does not recognize. Initially, none of the crimes that are imputed to him the moment denies everything. Sir, very intelligent boy in principle, denies the imputations, but ends up recognizing the murder of Sonia Rubio regarding the other for crimes. It is not that the children, but says, not remember anything. Then he told me, if it is clear that I killed Sonia Rubio, because the evidence in this case incriminates, but it is that I do not recognize truth. They also say that he could kill others, but I do not remember anything, and I offer him a kind of strategy and say, look, if it is true that you have amnesia, I explain that there is a system to try to remember. If really he had been author of the other crimes, then he proposes different memory exercises to work of the Civil Guard. And of course, also the criminologists go tying loose and go uniting those links that until that moment have been unconnected in this long chain of crimes. And finally, Cornered Simon has no choice but to recognize that he has been the cause of these 5 murders. When I saw him again, he told me, look, I have remembered such crime. I have remembered. It is certain, he writes, then he remembered between quotes the other crimes. Joaquín Ferrándiz never collapsed. He always maintained his composure. And he told up to where he wanted to tell it is not that it is a person who collapses and tells you everything. No, he had by fascicles in cast arrived the confession of a detainee has allowed to clarify 5 murders of 5 women in the last 2 years. The judicial police says that he has the personality of a psychopath. Music. Applause. After obtaining the confession of Joaquín Ferrándiz, the Civil Guard carries out with him the reconstruction of each of the 5 crimes, takes us to the places where these acts have been committed, the investigated acts. All the investigated acts relates to modus operandi, how they could have happened. He goes explaining. He goes describing the why of each victim, because he's done certain things. And yes, it is true that he evolves in such a way that he even comes to distribute the fingerprints of the last of his victims, so that he is not identified, so that they crush her fingers if you know that maybe we're going to identify her. He says, I have not done that to man, because it is who has done it. Then he tells me, well, I took her dragging. Maybe it was with a drag. The fingers could rooster. The fingers are like this, and others were crushed one by one. We always avoided cruelty that he will never recognize. So his prior contact with all his victims in the case of the prostitutes of Vora, Ryu knows them because he is a person who frequents street prostitution. Habitually, the 5th victim, that would be Amelia Sandra, also has a relationship of moving in the same areas, the same pubs, and Sonia Rubio Arafat had friends in common and acquaintances in common that were also known and frequented by Joaquín Ferrándiz Ventura, specifically in the Sequiol neighborhood of Castellano. Ferrándiz ends up declaring what happens that terrible night with Sonia Rubio, how he approaches her, how he kills her, always starting from a previous, and it is that he approaches with the intention of assisting this girl, offering to take her home. And what is surprising is that at a given moment, Sound Rubio will end up doing that was a great problem of solid, lowered to your company tobacco, to a pub, from there to attractive, pleasant boy. Maybe one day they would talk something between them. and it was believed that it was a known serious trust has. A loose killer music, the investigators already know how he has. Killed Shimal the 5 young women, but there is still to find out the why hate. He had a bad version of something extraordinary. But since young 15 to 16 years, he wrote often in his diaries and reflected in them his anger and his frustration with many of the women who rejected him. This later, he is going to transfer his criminal acts. He is simply like a trophy reach a woman the power to get her and the power to dominate her if he is rejected by this woman in his diaries. And I am talking about a quite early age of adolescence. It is for him, it is well, the worst that could happen to him in the world, because he marked Shimal first, because he is a psychopath and perhaps enjoys when the woman dies in that last moment. Well, he is when he feels a tremendous satisfaction to rest, as he said in the case of Sonia. Says that when she stopped breathing, he felt an infinite peace. I think that the story of Chino is great hidden story truth, is that of many other serial killers, and it is the dissatisfaction that a conventional life produced him. He went down the street in the car. He was always looking for a ham and lack, always looking for the victim, looking to see where he could attack. If you live in an environment, let's say ordinary way that you have is to feel a power, an extraordinary power of fantasy, where the domination of the other provides you a brutal egocentric satisfaction. He has a relationship with women as a domination. It is an emotionally perverse satisfaction, but to you, it produces a different life, although it is during a few hours that is the moment in which you well from that you see the victim until you finally abandon her. But one has to think the hours or days over time that a person can dedicate to fantasize overs on November 24th. 1999, more than 4 years after the murder of Sonia Rubio, the trial against Joaquín Ferrándiz Ventura begins. It was a trial with a lot of media expectation. The case obviously had aroused the interest of all the media, also of society, because of that morbidity that gave him to see seated on the bench the then still alleged author of those 5 deaths of which he was accused in a year. That 5 murders are committed in a small city like Castellón. That was tremendous for our society, for the Castellonenses. It was tremendous. During the trial sessions, Joaquín Ferrándiz goes with sunglasses, covers his face with his hands, and barely gives any sign of having any empathy or emotional relationship with what is happening around him. It seems that nothing goes with him, and when we entered the room, he was already in the room, always with the same position, that with the elbows supported on the knees, with the head down. One of the key moments, and surely the hardest for Ferrándiz in this trial, was the statement of that young woman who was saved in extremis by a neighbor who was waiting for his daughter. The statement was made behind a screen to preserve the identity of the attacked. And it was key because this person not only told what happened, but also recognized in the figure of Shimal, the guilty of that aggression, appeared to me from between 2 cars, an individual who tried to cover her mouth. And I began to scream. The individual is the accused. Yes, too. On January 12, 2000, Provincial Court of Castellón signs a conviction sentence against Joaquín Ferrándiz Ventura. There's already sentence in the trial for the murder of 5 women in Castellón. The accused, Joaquín Ferrándiz, has been sentenced to 69 years in prison. In addition, he will have to pay 100 million pesetas to the relatives of the victims. Unfortunately, unmasking him took a few years and put the life to 5 people. But there is no need to be afraid. There are formulas and there will be controls. But if a person serves a sentence, he has to leave, whether we like it more or like it less, than potentially. If he cannot be a danger, if he is not controlled in some way, I do not know how we are. And if we are capable of controlling a person 24 hours a day, the experience I have is that they leave prison again and reoffend with the same force and seriousness that they have done years before. If I had to bet, I would bet not much money, but I would bet something that he, of course, in Spain, that he will not reoffend. And now he is in South America. He is going to Africa. Well, that is another story why, and no one knows. And what I will never forget the times that I talked to them in a few normality could not be a conversation. So normal is that you felt like leaving him, go home. That is the most worrying of that fungus. The normality has a society that accept a challenge of this nature, that he may or may not. Do we have some guarantee that he is not going to do it again? Joaquín Ferrándiz remains imprisoned in the maximum security prison of Herrera de la Mancha in Ciudad Real. He is 20 years behind bars, and all this time he has not requested any penitentiary permit. His release from prison is scheduled for the year 2023.